Well, thank you for having me.
So, John, we just started recording, and thank
Okay.
you for your persistence in getting through. I understand the technical challenges, right? Trust me. I mean, a lot of times I find myself talking and I've got myself on mute, and so I appreciate your persistence in getting through here, and we're thrilled to have you, John. As I noted before you jumped on, that you and I had a very nice conversation up at the Governor's Cup this summer.
Yeah.
That's the first time I'd met you, and so we had a great conversation. And just as a little brief highlight for everyone else on here, the Public Service Commission and the Montana Supreme Court races are typically the two races that I get the most phone calls from friends and colleagues about, because they're looking for insight and advice, because those two races are frankly underappreciated by the voting public, and they don't get the sort of attention that they deserve. And so we wanted to try to provide an opportunity to allow folks to be able to meet the candidates that are running for Public Service Commission. And so we've got John Repke with us today. And Charles Robinson has got some questions he's going to ask John. And then we're recording this so that we can then post it and you can share it and other people can access it. And John, you should feel free to grab that this video once we get it posted and share it amongst your folks as well if you see any value in it. So this is just an opportunity that we wanted to give to our members to be able to get to meet you and hear a little bit about you. I'd like to turn it now over to Charles Robinson, who's our Director of Government Affairs for the Montana Chamber of Commerce. And Charles is going to lead the rest of the conversation, and want to thank Northwestern Energy in particular as a great supporter of the Montana Chamber of Commerce, and MDU Resources, another great member, and we appreciate particularly those two great members that we have. It's those sort of dues that allow us the resources to be able to do this thing. So with that, Charles Robinson.
Thanks, Todd. And John, thanks for joining us. I want to take a minute to give you an introduction, and then turn the floor over to you, John, to share with the folks who joined the forum. And of course, like Todd said, we are recording, and we'll send this out to our entire membership around the state later this week. So thanks again. John Repke, as some of you may know, has 40 years of experience in the private sector, in finance, strategic planning, managing organizations. He has worked in several industries, including energy and waste management in other states, and there were regulated industries, regulated by agencies similar to our PSC. And most recently, John was CFO to a company many of you know of, SmartLam, a structural wood product manufacturer that's out of Columbia Falls. He retired in the spring of 2021. So throughout his career, John has acquired an extensive knowledge of business finance, but he really is most proud of leading motivated teams and developing healthy workplace culture based on respect, professionalism, integrity. John sits on the board of Wild Montana, their Flathead chapter, and he's a past board member of the Glacier National Park Conservancy. And in Whitefish, John volunteers his time developing safe and accessible bike and pedestrian trails. He's also taught classes and provided consulting to local businesses through economic development organizations across Northwest Montana. John and his wife Beth have been married for 42 years, and he enjoys hiking, biking, skiing, and floating and fishing the Montana rivers, especially with his grandchildren. John holds a bachelor's degree from The Ohio State University and a master's degree in business administration from the University of Denver. And of course, nobody's going to hear your applause over Zoom, but please join me in welcoming John Repke.
Well, thank you, Charles, and thank you, Todd. I really do appreciate you doing this. I'm sorry I'm not on video, but it's probably just as well, because had a change of plans today and don't have a good background or even a decent shirt on. So probably better that I'm just on the phone. But I really do appreciate you inviting me to do this. And I agree that it's important. You know, the Public Service Commission is important to Montana businesses, but it is not, you know, it's not well understood. So let me just take a minute and talk about what the Public Service Commission does. It's responsible for regulating investor-owned companies that provide services like electric service, gas, in some cases water, in some cases solid waste hauling and that kind of thing. And it regulates them with the objective of ensuring that those services are affordable, reliable, and sustainable for the long term. So this is really economic regulation, trying to balance the interests of those companies providing the services and ensuring that they're viable and can provide reliable services with those of the customers who don't have any other choice but to use those services, and we need to make sure that those rates are affordable. So you heard a little bit about my intro. I've 40 years of experience in private sector finance. You know, I've worked in oil and gas, waste services, and other businesses that are frequently regulated by agencies like the PSC. And why is that important? Well, in most states, the equivalent of the Public Service Commission is a nonpartisan appointed position. And in those cases where those, you know, they appoint their commissioners, there are requirements, and those requirements match up very well to the requirements that I have. In other words, they want people who understand business financials, they understand operating costs, operating budgets, investment analysis, risk-adjusted rates of return, all those kinds of things that you know, you need to understand in order to do that that balance between the economics of the providers and the users. So you don't really need to wonder what are the requirements for this position, because they're clearly spelled out by other states, and you know, and that's how both sides are best served, and that's exactly the experience I have. Beyond that, I think it's very important that you know, honesty, integrity, and professionalism are present in an agency like the Public Service Commission. In any business that I've been in, and I imagine the businesses that you're in, or that you own or run, whatever the case is, are those characteristics are non-negotiable. Unfortunately, on the Public Service Commission here in Montana, that hasn't really been the case recently. I've got a page on my website titled PSC Nonsense, and you can look at that. The website is www.repke4psc5.com, and the 4 and the 5 are numbers. But if you look on there, you'll see some articles about, you know, the failed audit and the email theft and threatened blackouts and things like that. It's just not, you know, honest professional behavior, and we need to change that in the state agency. So I got into this race to offer voters the chance to vote for someone who has the experience to do the job and the integrity to do it right. You know, I have the relevant experience and expertise. My opponent does not. I will work this job full time. In many states, it's required that it be your only job. My opponent plans to continue her medical practice 3 days a week, and so will work part-time for a job that pays $112,000. So it pays full-time. It should be done full-time, but it'll be a side gig if she wins. And I will be professional. My opponent, while on the Flathead County Health Board, according to the chair of the health board at the time, as well as the top health officer in the county would show up unprepared, refuse to listen to experts, refuse to vote on matters that came before the board, and was not honest. In other words, she caused a lot of chaos. And for those of you that live in the Flathead, you're probably familiar with that. Certainly I am, because that's where I live. And that's just not good for business. I spent 40 years in business, and I know that having some, predictability, some, certainly discipline in the regulatory environment is key to making sure that businesses can thrive, and that's what you would get with me. I'm I'm a problem solver. I'm objective, and again, I have the experience and the discipline to do the job. So I'll leave it at that and see if there are any questions.
Well, thank you, John. We appreciate your description of the agency and your how your background ties into that. What would be your top priority at the Public Service Commission if you're elected?
Well, the top priority, I know this doesn't sound real sexy or anything, but the top priority is to make sure it does its job as intended. So, set aside the nonsense and focus on doing the job well. There recently was a substantial increase announced by Northwestern, and while I think that I can understand why that increase was necessary, I think the way it came about and the size of it with a short notice is something that could have been avoided. And I think the Public Service Commission needs to be, proactive in working with the companies that it regulates to ensure that that type of thing doesn't happen. So I think even within the scope of the boundaries that the PSC currently operates in, they could do a better job, and they could, and that's really what I would intend to do.
Can you share with us something you've learned in your career up to this point that will shape the way you will approach the PSC if you're elected?
Well, I mean, I would say just about everything I've learned in my career relates to the PSC. Certainly on the technical side, I've evaluated, one of the things that the PSC does is evaluate proposals that come before it. It's not, the PSC does not make proposals about new energy sources, but it evaluates those that come before it, whether it's a regulated utility or a third party looking to, provide power into the grid, for example. And though the analysis of investments like that and the calculations of the rate of returns and all of that type of work is something that I have deep experience in, and I think I can truly contribute to making that whole thing work. But beyond that, my strategic planning experience, I believe, would be helpful. But my management experience and just helping to manage the agency to retain top talent. I believe there's a lot of good people there. We need to make sure that the environment that they're working in is healthy, productive, one that they can flourish in, frankly, and that will attract good people. So, I hope to accomplish that as well.
Looking back over your career, are there situations that have received a lot of media attention? You mentioned how the PSC is under the microscope from time to time, and even in the best of circumstances where commissioners are all performing at their best, the PSC gets a lot of media attention. How did you handle that kind of attention when those situations have arisen in the past? And how do you think that will affect or guide your service on the PSC if you're elected?
Well, I've had some stressful situations in my career for sure. I mean, I worked for Waste Management, which at the time became one of the largest accounting fraud cases in U.S. history. And I testified in front of the SEC and also in federal court against some of my former bosses. And that's a very difficult thing to do. But what I learned from that is that, I mean, obviously integrity is always key, but transparency is important as well. And once you kind of cross that divide and become less transparent, the problems only compound, and they can do so quickly and dramatically. And I'm confident that that the PSC, if it's objective, if it truly evaluates the issues that come before it on an objective, unbiased basis, and it does so transparently with participation of all interested parties, there won't be hopefully there will be there will be positive media attention because the job will be done right. All the parties will understand how the decisions are made. All the parties will respect the process under which the decisions are made, and the media coverage should be positive. So if I'm on the PSC, I wouldn't expect to encounter negative media coverage.
John, what's your view on the mix of fossil fuels and intermittent renewables in Montana?
Well, for sure, there's going to be a period of time where we're going to have a all of the above type basis for delivering energy to the utility customers in Montana. So we will continue to use fossil fuels until that becomes no longer economically viable. I'm sure we'll gravitate towards more renewables. I'm sure we will need some peaking plants in the meantime. So there will be a mix of all. But the important thing is that when we evaluate these opportunities, we don't do it with a bias in one way or another, but we evaluate what's best for, not only the near-term rates and that type of thing, but the longer-term needs of the customers.
So as you've been campaigning out there, what kind of concerns or ideas have you heard from business owners?
Well, I mean, for sure, the business owners who are customers of Northwestern are, express concern about the magnitude of the rate increase. That's been, no question that that's not only business owners, but it's households as well. But you mentioned that I was CFO of SmartLam for a few years, and I can tell you that SmartLam is a pretty robust manufacturing company with a dozen machine centers that all run on electric power and moving a lot of lumber. And we used a lot of electricity. Now, we were a customer of Flathead Electric, but I can't imagine getting a notice that, 4 months down the road, 5 months down the road, whatever it was, that my utility rates were going to increase nearly 26%. That would be devastating to a company like SmartLam, because most of the products that they sell have a lead time where you've already sold products, 6 months to a year in advance. So yeah, I can appreciate the fact that business owners who are trying to manage their budgets would like a little more certainty, a little more forward thinking when it comes to what they can expect on their utility rates.
What else would you
And
like
also, let me one
Yeah.
other thing I will say is that a lot of business owners are saying that the inconsistencies that have come out of the PSC are make things challenging. And there's been a couple court cases over the last couple of years. In particular, I'm thinking of Vote Solar and Montana Sun, where if you do go back and look at the case and read through it, you'll see that the decision-making process that the PSC followed was not, was flawed, and the courts overturned their decisions. But that's just another stress on businesses, because they can't, regardless of how well they present the information that's relevant to the situation, if the agency that's overseeing it and making the decisions on it isn't doing it in a rational way, and then it has to get kicked to the courts, it costs time and money to get everything done.
What else would you like to share before we wrap up the forum today?
I think that's about it. I probably need to go. That beeping is a sign that I have to leave, but I really do appreciate Charles and Todd, the fact that you guys organized this and gave me a chance to talk. And I wish I could have done it over Zoom, but I'm happy to have done it this way. And thank you all who are on this call for participating and expressing interest in this race.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for running.
Thanks, John.
Okay.
Our prayers and
thank you
with you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
As we wrap up here, I threw it in the chat, and thank you, Matt, for throwing on the link to our candidate forums that are on our YouTube channel. And I also wanted to throw on there that every year we do a candidate profile piece called Eye on the Vote. And what we do with this piece is we go to the candidates, we have questions that we ask them to answer and submit to us, and then we put it together in this publication called Eye on the Vote. And John Repke is in that Eye on the Vote. I think it's a pretty good piece, and you should grab that and share that with your friends and your family and your colleagues, because it's there's some information there on all the candidates that submitted information, and we put a fair amount of time and energy into pulling that thing together, and it's there for you to use. So I would encourage you to go on there and link to that and send that to your friends and colleagues as a source of information that they can use in making a informed decision on this and other races. So.
Well, thanks, Todd. And I just also want to thank everyone for joining and to share you. We have invited Andy Bukacek to a similar forum. Have not confirmed with her yet, but we'll be letting you know as we have more of those scheduled.
Thanks, everyone.